Solitude for the spiritually awakened is not a retreat from life, but a deep immersion into it. When one begins to awaken, the silence that once felt empty starts to bloom with presence. It becomes a temple, not built of stone or words, but of awareness itself. In this sacred space, the awakened soul meets not loneliness, but unity. Here, in the stillness, every breath is a dialogue with the divine. Every moment a reminder that one is not separate from existence, but part of its eternal rhythm. In ordinary life, people are often afraid of being alone. They fill the silence with sound, conversation, distraction, anything to avoid meeting themselves. But when the veil of spiritual sleep is lifted, one discovers that silence is not an enemy to be defeated, but a friend long forgotten. It speaks in whispers too soft for a noisy mind to hear. In solitude, you begin to sense the pulse of life beneath all movement, a pulse that beats not just in you, but through everything that exists. To the spiritually awake, solitude is sacred because it is the only state in which the mind can dissolve into presence. When you are constantly surrounded by others, you are also surrounded by their stories, their identities, their expectations. Each interaction pulls you into a web of personality and opinion. But in solitude, these masks fall away. What remains is your essence, vast, quiet, and boundless. In that realization, the need for validation or social affirmation fades, for you have touched something deeper than approval, truth. Visitors, though often kind, unknowingly disturb that sacred stillness. Their presence brings with it the hum of thought, the friction of ego, the chatter of the world. The awakened one does not judge them for it, for once they too lived that way. But now they see. They see that inner peace is fragile when it depends on outer calm. To maintain their inner temple, they must guard it, not out of fear, but reverence. Imagine a lake, perfectly still, reflecting the sky. A single stone dropped into it ripples the surface, distorting the reflection. The lake's clarity returns only when the ripples fade. The spiritually awake person lives as that lake, seeking clarity not from control, but from natural stillness. Visitors, with their hurried thoughts and restless energy, are like stones. The awakened one loves them still, but loves the stillness more. In this sacred solitude, they are not lonely. They are in conversation with existence itself. The wind becomes a whisper of eternity, the flicker of a candle a sign of life's fragile beauty. In stillness, the heart expands until it embraces all things. This is why the awakened do not crave visitors. Their communion is already complete. They have learned to drink from the fountain that never dries, the inner source of being. When one reaches this level of awareness, solitude ceases to be isolation. It becomes participation. You realize that the trees, the sky, the earth, all are your companions. You no longer seek company because you are never without it. The presence of life surrounds and fills you. You become both observer and observed, both the drop and the ocean. And so, solitude becomes sacred because it is the mirror of truth. In it, the self sees its reflection clearly, unclouded by the noise of others, untouched by the dust of distraction. In this stillness, the soul remembers its origin. It sees that it was never apart from anything. It was simply looking outward for what could only be found within. This is the meaning of sacred solitude. It is not rejection, but return. It is the gentle closing of the door to the world so that the window to the infinite can open. In that quiet chamber of the heart, the awakened soul sits, not in withdrawal, but in worship. And in that silence, everything is heard. When the spirit awakens, it begins to perceive life not only through the eyes, but through the subtle field of energy that underlies everything. The spiritually awake person becomes like a finely tuned instrument, sensitive, receptive, and aware of vibrations most people never notice. Every thought, every emotion, every unspoken intention carries energy. When someone enters a room, they do not bring only their body, they bring the residue of their inner world, their worries, desires, and unprocessed emotions. To the awakened one, this is felt immediately, like a sudden breeze in a still forest. It is not about judgment, it is simply sensitivity. When your inner being is clear, peaceful, and in tune with higher consciousness, you naturally begin to sense discordant frequencies around you. Imagine a perfectly balanced musical note being interrupted by a string slightly out of tune. The difference is subtle, yet it alters the entire harmony. In much the same way, the awakened person feels the disharmony that others carry, not because they are superior, but because their awareness is heightened. They have opened the inner senses that once lay dormant. Most people live with constant inner noise, streams of thought, emotional turbulence, and energetic restlessness. They may not even notice it, for the collective noise of society masks it. But when one has found stillness, when the mind has been quieted through meditation, reflection, or deep inner work, this inner silence becomes precious. It becomes the foundation of their spiritual health. Visitors, no matter how kind or loving, can unknowingly disturb that fragile equilibrium. Their energies, full of movement and mental residue, ripple through the calm field of the awakened being. This is why the spiritually awake often prefer solitude or very selective company. They are not avoiding people, they are protecting their vibration. They have learned that peace is not something that happens by chance. It must be cultivated, tended to, and guarded with awareness. It is like a garden. Once you have cleared the weeds and nurtured the flowers, you do not allow anyone to trample carelessly through it. You share it only with those who understand its value. The spiritually awake also recognize that energy exchange is constant. Every conversation, every interaction is a meeting of two fields of consciousness. If one person carries confusion, fear, or anger, that energy subtly enters the shared space. For those still asleep to the unseen, this goes unnoticed. But for those who live in awareness, the shift is tangible. It can feel like a heaviness, a draining of life force, or simply a disturbance of peace. In truth, the awakened person loves others deeply, but with a love that is no longer bound by attachment. Their compassion is vast, but it does not require physical presence. They can send love silently, through thought, through intention, through stillness itself. They understand that the most profound way to uplift another is not by constant interaction, but by maintaining the frequency of peace. Their calmness radiates like light. It touches others even from afar. This heightened sensitivity is both a gift and a challenge. It teaches the awakened one to honor their boundaries, to listen to their inner rhythm, and to move with awareness rather than obligation. They no longer entertain company merely to please others or to fill time. They choose their moments carefully, knowing that true connection must flow from mutual presence, not need. Energy sensitivity also teaches discernment. It reveals that harmony is not about agreement but alignment. The awakened one seeks resonance, relationships and interactions that vibrate at the same frequency of truth and authenticity. Anything less feels heavy, unbalanced, and draining. Thus, they walk through life with quiet grace, appearing detached, but inwardly overflowing with connection to everything that is alive. Their silence is not avoidance, it is attunement. They have learned that to protect their energy is to honor their spiritual path, and so they love from a distance, bless in silence, and keep their sacred peace intact. To be spiritually awake is to feel deeply, not only one's own soul, but the soul of the world. And once you have tasted that depth, superficial noise becomes unbearable. You begin to crave the purity of still energy, the space where the divine hums softly. This is why the awakened cherish solitude, not because they dislike visitors, but because they have become guardians of the unseen, keepers of a sacred frequency that can only thrive in peace. And one of the most profound realizations that come with spiritual awakening is the recognition of how much of our social life is built upon illusion. The illusion of politeness, of obligation, of needing to maintain an image that keeps us accepted within the collective. The spiritually awake begin to see through this veil. They start to sense that most human interactions are not genuine meetings of souls, but exchanges between masks. People talk not to understand, but to fill silence. They visit not to connect, but to escape their own stillness. When awareness deepens, such exchanges feel hollow, like echoes in an empty hall. The awakened person no longer finds comfort in the performance of social expectations. They see that so much of what we call connection is driven by fear, the fear of being alone, the fear of disapproval, the fear of silence. Society teaches us to equate constant interaction with belonging, but the awakened soul understands that true belonging arises only when one feels whole within themselves. They no longer seek validation from others because they have found authenticity in being. When a person awakens, they begin to live in harmony with truth rather than expectation. The need to please, to impress, or to conform dissolves. They see that the rituals of constant visiting, small talk, and social drama are ways of running from presence. And presence, the art of simply being, is the very essence of spirituality. Visitors, in this sense, often represent the pull of the outer world, the invitation to return to noise, distraction, and pretense. It is not that the awakened one despises others, quite the contrary. They love humanity with a compassion too deep for words. But they no longer wish to participate in the unconscious games of society. They would rather sit in silence than engage in talk that leads nowhere. They value depth over drama, essence over appearance. To those who remain asleep, this may look like detachment, but it is, in fact, liberation. The spiritually awake realize that no amount of external company can fill the void of inner disconnection. They have learned through solitude that peace is not a gift others can give, it is a state of being one must reclaim. Thus, they are no longer bound by the illusion of social obligation. They no longer visit merely because it is expected, nor entertain company that disturbs their balance. Their relationships become sacred, chosen, and intentional. When you awaken, you begin to understand that energy flows where attention goes. If your time is constantly scattered across endless interactions, you lose the ability to touch the depth of your own existence. The awakened protect their time the way a monk protects the flame of a candle in the wind. They know that a single careless gust, an argument, gossip, or unnecessary conversation, can extinguish the peace they've cultivated. Through this clarity, they redefine connection itself. True connection, they discover, is not proximity, it is presence. You can sit beside someone and feel miles apart, or be alone in your room and feel deeply united with the universe. The spiritually awake choose the latter, for it nourishes their soul. They do not measure relationships by time spent together, but by the authenticity of energy shared. As their perception sharpens, they begin to sense how collective conditioning pressures people to seek approval constantly, to say yes when the heart says no, to smile when the spirit longs for silence. The awakened one steps out of that pattern. They choose honesty over conformity, inner truth over social comfort. They no longer fear being misunderstood because they have found peace in understanding themselves. This is why the spiritually awake often seem distant or private. They are not rejecting the world, they are simply declining to participate in its illusions. They are learning to be real in a world that fears reality. And in that authenticity they find the purest form of love, a love that does not depend on company, compliments, or attention, but flows naturally from the stillness of being. To awaken spiritually is to remember that connection does not come from constant contact, it comes from consciousness. The one who lives in awareness does not need to chase belonging, because they have realized that they are already part of everything. The illusion of social obligation fades, and in its place, a deeper truth arises, that true love begins when one is at peace with solitude. The journey of awakening is not about escaping the world, but about learning to see it clearly. When awareness deepens, life itself becomes the greatest teacher. The spiritually awake begin to realize that every experience, every emotion, every thought is a movement of consciousness, a wave arising in the vast ocean of being. But to observe this dance clearly, one must be still. The mind, like water, must be calm to reflect truth. Visitors, conversations, and distractions, though often harmless, create ripples that disturb this clarity. It is not that the awakened reject people, they simply recognize the necessity of silence to see deeply. Inner observation is the heart of spiritual maturity. It is the art of watching without judging, of seeing without reacting. When you are alone, there is nothing to defend, nothing to perform. The masks fall away, and what remains is the raw presence of who you truly are. This is why solitude becomes the natural habitat of the awakened soul. It is not withdrawal, but expansion, an expansion inward into the subtle depths of consciousness. When one begins to practice this inner observation, even the simplest moments become revelations. The sound of rain on the window, the flicker of a candle flame, the rhythm of breath, all become mirrors reflecting the eternal now. In the stillness of solitude, you discover that awareness itself is alive, vast, and luminous. But such clarity is fragile when surrounded by constant noise. The chatter of the world pulls the mind outward, scattering attention across 1,000 surfaces, leaving no space to observe the still center within. Visitors bring their stories, their emotions, and their unspoken energies into your space. Their presence, however well-intentioned, stirs the waters of your inner lake. To one who is still learning to remain centered, this disturbance can feel like losing touch with the quiet current of the self. Thus, the spiritually awake often prefer fewer interactions, not because they wish to isolate themselves, but because they value the discipline of inner listening. To observe oneself clearly is a sacred task. It requires patience, humility, and honesty. When the awakened one sits alone, they are not escaping life. They are engaging with it more intimately than ever before. They watch their thoughts rise and fade, their emotions bloom and dissolve. They witness the patterns of fear, desire, and memory without being consumed by them. This witnessing is liberation. It frees the soul from the endless loop of reaction and teaches the beauty of simply being. When one has tasted the serenity of such observation, external company becomes secondary. Conversations filled with noise, comparison, or complaint lose their appeal. The awakened person no longer finds pleasure in superficial talk, for their heart has learned to speak the silent language of being. They discover that true wisdom does not arise from words, but from awareness. The more they listen inwardly, the more they hear the quiet pulse of the divine. This inner dance of observation transforms life itself. Ordinary events begin to shimmer with meaning. Washing dishes, walking under the moon, feeling the breeze, all become meditations. There is no separation between the observer and the observed. Everything becomes one continuous flow of consciousness expressing itself through form. Visitors, in contrast, often remind the awakened of how easily the mind becomes entangled again. Every conversation invites opinions, judgments, and emotional exchange. For most, this is normal. But to the one who has glimpsed inner stillness, such engagement feels like a step away from truth. Not because others are wrong, but because the awakened has learned that peace is fragile and must be tended carefully. This is the paradox of awakening. As one grows closer to life, they often appear to withdraw from it. Yet their withdrawal is not rejection. It is refinement. They are learning to live from the center rather than the surface. They are learning to speak only when silence allows it. They are learning that to truly observe the world, one must not constantly participate in its noise. Thus, the dance of inner observation is both discipline and devotion. It is the path of those who wish to see reality as it is, unfiltered by distraction. The spiritually awake do not dislike visitors. They simply understand that the more one listens inwardly, the more sacred silence becomes. And in that silence, they hear the eternal song that has been playing all along. The spiritually awake love deeply, but without attachment. Their compassion flows not from need, but from understanding. They do not cling to others, for they see that love is not possession, it is presence. In solitude, their heart opens wider, embracing all life equally. They can love a friend, a stranger, a tree, or a breeze with the same tenderness, because they see the same essence in all. When they withdraw, it is not rejection, but renewal, a return to the wellspring of love within, so that when they give again, it is pure, unconditional, and free from all demand.